What you are looking at is a definitive turning point in modern political alignment. A high-stakes clash on Piers Morgan, uncensored between legal scholar Alan Dershowitz and retired Green Beret Joe Kent, has exposed a massive fracture within the conservative movement over foreign policy. This debate goes far beyond a disagreement over regional alliances. It is a direct, live confrontation between the old guard interventionist establishment and the rising populist base over taxpayer priorities and national sovereignty. Let's look at the breakdown.
What many people say to me, I've spoken to many Jews and Israelis in the last few weeks, and the common theme is that they think the current Israeli government has moved from any form of mainstream government into an extremist government, driven by the agendas of people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, that Netanyahu has followed their lead now. And that it's for that reason that there is so much rising sentiment against Israel as a country. And it's why Jewish people worldwide feel increasingly unsafe. A lot of them actually blame the Netanyahu government for this with their actions. What do you say to that?
Well, I had dinner with Bill Clinton when he was president, and he once said something very interesting to me. He said, the real problem with Israel is that it's a democracy, damn it. He said, they actually get to vote and decide who their leaders are, and they get to decide what their policies are. When I want Jordan to do something, Clinton said, I just snap my fingers and they do it. I want Egypt to do it, they do it. If I want Saudi Arabia to do it, they do it. But if I want Israel to do it, well, we'll have to poll this. We have to get the small cabinet, the big cabinet. We'll have elections. Israel has had more elections in the last 10 years than any other democracy. It's a vibrant democracy. And tragically, people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who I despise and wish weren't in the government, are required by Netanyahu to form a government. I hope you're right. I wish you're right that the anti-Israelism and the anti-Semitism that's developing around the world is simply a function of Netanyahu being the leader. I don't believe that. I think that's become the latest excuse and cover for anti-Semitism. Anti-Zionism has become a cover. And remember, much of the opposition is anti-Zionist. They're anti the concept of the existence of a nation state, an independent nation state for the Jewish people. And as long as there is an independent nation state, we will see increasing anti-Zionism. And I'm going to fight that regardless of who the Israeli electorate vote to be their prime minister.
OK, Joe Kent, welcome back to Uncensored. What's your response to Alan Dershowitz?
I think just in general, Americans, especially the Americans who voted for Donald Trump, who represent the majority of Republicans, are sick and tired of having these discussions about foreign countries, whether it's Israel or anyone else. But Israel right now has a outsized influence on our foreign policy in the Middle East, which has catapulted us into this current conflict with Iran, which helped drive us into the tragic Iraq war. So, look, I think Americans want our government to focus on our problems here in America. Drive around any American city, you're going to see poverty, despair. Those are the issues that people want to focus on. They don't want to focus on, who's running the Israeli preferences are of the Israeli government to drive us into the next series of conflicts. So I think that's why you're seeing so many people who came out and voted for President Trump when he campaigned on putting American interests first. I don't think we need to get rid of any kind of, relationship that we have with Israel. I don't think this is an Israeli versus Palestinian issue. I think what happens between the Israelis and the Palestinians is, quite frankly, their business. I think most Americans would agree. I think we just need to have normal relations with Israel like we would with any other country. But right now, our relationship with Israel is so off-balanced that you are seeing a lot of people putting this issue front and center because the war in Iran and the wars in the Middle East for the last 2 decades plus have consumed so much blood, so much treasure, and just so much attention from our leaders that many people, especially on the Republican side, are saying this is out of whack. We need our leaders to prioritize us. And I think that's what you're going to see in the next election cycle, not just the midterms, but especially as we have an open primary in 2028 for the presidency.
I don't disagree with that. Let me make one correction. Let me make one correction, please, and that is Israel was opposed to the United States getting into the Iraq war. I know that. I was in the office of Prime Minister Sharon when he personally told me that he had spoken to President Bush and had urged him not to send American troops into Iraq. Israel was opposed to the Iraq war. It is in favor of trying to get regime change in Iran because Iran is existentially threatening the existence of Israel. But when it comes to Iraq, that's very, very different. And you know, Israel has been a great ally of the United States. And over the years, it's been one of the few people that the United States can count on for everything. And the major function that the United States has had recently is to stop Israel. It stopped Israel when it bombed the nuclear...
Alan, I would say, I just don't think that's right when it comes to the Iran war, because we know from the big New York Times deep dive last week that Benjamin Netanyahu, on his 7th or 8th trip to the White House in a matter of months, sat in the Situation Room at the White House with the head of Mossad joining on the big screen and sold Donald Trump the idea that there was a chance to decapitate the leadership in Iran, and that as a result the IRGC would collapse from within, the people would rise up, and they'd all be too distracted to even think about the Strait of Hormuz. Well, the first bit happened, and there's no doubt the Americans, I think, joined in at the behest of Netanyahu, because we heard it come out of Marco Rubio's mouth. He said the reason American forces preemptively struck in Iran...
Then he withdrew that.
But I tend to believe what the Secretary of State in America says publicly when he's first asked, rather than when he's told us. So they got in first. Then
that's a question of timing. That's a question of timing.
Yeah, but it's also a question of who
the timing was determined.
It's a question of who's...
Well,
it's also about who's pulling the strings.
That's the oldest anti-Semitic trope, is pulling that the Jews are pulling the strings. Nobody tells Trump what to do. Trump decides what to do. What Israel said and what the United States together said is, we have intelligence that all these people are meeting in the same place, so this is the time to do it. But the United States and Donald Trump did not start a war based on Israel's interest. They started a war based on American interests. Jews comprise 2% of the American population, half of whom don't even support Israel. Muslims and Arabs are 1.3%. Trump complains, and to me he complains. Why don't Jews vote for me? I'm so good. Why don't they vote for me? Trump doesn't go to war in order to satisfy Israel's legitimate interests rather than the legitimate interests of the United States. Of course, it's part of Netanyahu's job to persuade President Trump that it's in Israel's interest and the United States' interest to try to decapitate and to destroy Iran. They are an existential threat to America's interests and to America's allies. There was miscalculation. They are stronger and more determined than anybody thought. And the Gulf of Hormuz, by the way, the answer to the Gulf of Hormuz is that there have to be ways of circumventing the Gulf of Hormuz and of having an oil supply. We cannot end this war allowing Iran to maintain control over what is now an important waterway. It should cease to be an important waterway, which is why I have urged right from the beginning that the United States must control the straits and say to Iran, look, either everybody goes through or no one goes through. That was the message I sent in my op-ed. That's what I told people in the White House. Iran can't be in control. And the end of this war may be that the Gulf of Hormuz will be closed to everybody, and we'll have to figure out other ways of getting the oil to Asia. That will be a good thing.
Well, that will be a total disaster for everybody. But I'd also make a wider point, Alan, which is...
No, I don't think so.
One of the reasons I think that Israel's been getting increasingly unpopular is because anyone that dares to criticize the Israeli government, and I stand by my suggestion that Benjamin Netanyahu has been pulling some strings with Trump because he managed to persuade the fourth American president. Well, let me finish my point. And I think I should be allowed to use that phrase. I should be allowed to use that phrase without you calling me anti-Semitic.
I don't think so.
I think you know I'm not anti-Semitic.
No, I'm not. Hey, by the way, I would never call you anti-Semitic. You're a friend of the Jews. You're a friend of Israel. What I'm telling you is something historical, that the phrase pulling the strings is a trope, and it shouldn't be used. And I wish you would use other terms. put pressure, that's fine. Pulling the strings, having a puppet, that should not be permitted. I like you very much, and I support you all the time, but I criticize you for using that term. Please don't use that term. It's historic.
No, it depends
reminds
if people are
too much.
It depends
of what other people who have different motives would say.
Alan, it actually depends if people are actually pulling strings, and I do think Netanyahu's been doing that. Let me bring in Joe Kent. I mean, Joe Kent, this is one of the more unsavoury. Well, I'll use the term I feel is appropriate. Joe Kent, I mean, this idea that
I'll criticize you for it.
Terms,
and I'll criticize you for it. You can say what you want, and I can say what I want. That's what the open marketplace of ideas is all about.
100%. We are, and especially on a show like Uncensored. Okay. You're entitled to your opinion.
We agree to
about
disagree.
The use of a phrase. Okay. I'm entitled to it too. Yeah. Joe Kent. That's right. I do believe that there's been enormous pressure, Joe Kent, from Benjamin Netanyahu to literally try and dictate what America would do. And I think he did it. He tried to do it with Obama. He tried to do it with Joe Biden, and he failed. We know that from Antony Blinken, who told us that he tried, and both times the American president said, I'm not coming with you if you attack Iran, and Israel did not attack Iran in either eventuality. So we know that here he found a president that would go along with it, and it's turned into, I think, a bit of a disaster here. What is your reading of that?
Yeah, I would more accurately describe it as a echo chamber that was created around President Trump. So what the Israelis do a very effective job of is they do punch way above their weight class. The Israelis, and this is on us, this is on the U.S. government's, this is our fault, we give them more access than they should have, than any foreign country should have. So what I witnessed over the last year was official engagements from members of Benjamin Netanyahu's government, the Israeli government, come and have official engagements with members of our government and say things like Iran can't have any enrichment. The policy has to be zero enrichment, when, in fact, President Trump had just said the policy was no nuclear weapon. And you'll see President Trump echo that in his talking points now. And the former Supreme Leader, before we killed him, agreed with that. And that got both President Trump and the Supreme Leader to the negotiating table. And so for almost a year, we saw constructive negotiations between us and the Iranian government. This was a direct threat to the Israelis. The Israelis told us this much. The Mossad director, David Barnea, specifically said that their goal was regime change in Iran. They weren't very shy about that whatsoever. And so they used their access through official channels through official channels to circumvent the intelligence community, because any time that the Israelis said the Iranians are 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon, they're making a nuclear weapon, the U.S. intelligence community, we would go and we would do our due diligence, we would check that, and we would find that the Iranian internal prohibition on developing a nuclear weapon was still holding. As a matter of fact, the Iranians were also withholding their proxies from attacking us as well. That's what the U.S. intelligence community agreed on. DNI Gabbard testified to that publicly twice in front of Congress. The Israelis, though, used their influence to circumvent the intelligence channels, and then they also had their surrogates within the media come and echo to President Trump via Fox News, the Wall Street Journal, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and say, hey, the red line is zero enrichment. And they said it enough, they made it repetitive enough through multiple avenues that President Trump was led to believe that his red line has to be zero enrichment. To take the issue off the table, we conducted Midnight Hammer. We totally obliterated their ability to enhance and enrich uranium. But then the Israelis came right back and said, hey, no, there's still more uranium there. You have to go in and physically get it. You have to control it, because the goal for the Israelis at that point was still regime change. And so they used their outsized influence on our government to drive this war. And when they thought they weren't going to get the war, they then said, we're going to go in, we're going to conduct attacks against the Iranians. We're going to target their supreme leader, which we knew from studying the intelligence and Iranian doctrine over the last several decades would result in the Iranians then attacking our bases in the region. So Marco Rubio was 100% accurate when he said there was no imminent attack against us being planned by the Iranians. The only thing that was imminent was the Israelis conducting that attack. That drove us into this conflict. And that should make every American take pause and think, what is our relationship with this country of Israel? Why are we letting them drive us into yet another war in the Middle East? How vital is it that we have control over the Straits of Hormuz?
Well, also, I mean, Alan, before you respond to Alan, hang on 1 second.
Sure.
Hang on, but before you respond, I want to play. I think it's a good time to play the Rahm Emanuel comments on the Bill Maher show on Friday, which were very interesting about why he believes America should no longer subsidize Israel militarily. Let's take a look at this.
We don't subsidize Great Britain buying weapons. We don't supply or financial assistance to Japan. Israel's a very wealthy nation. There should be no more taxpayer support for what they want to do. And they get the same deal that any one of our allies do. They have to abide by the laws of the United States if they're going to buy X weapons. And that's how it should be constructed. Jake's point, and I agree with this, is the Prime Minister went to this president like he's gone to 4 other presidents. And every one of the other presidents said, not a chance are we doing that because the equities are not worth it. This president bought it. He has responsibility as a commander-in-chief, and I think he made a big mistake for it.
Do you disagree with Rahm Emanuel?
Not greatly. Not greatly. The United States told Menachem Begin not to attack the Iraq nuclear reactor. They told Ehud Olmert not to attack the Syrian nuclear reactor. In both cases, Israel decided what was best for its own interest. As Olmert told Bush, I am the Prime Minister of Israel. You're the President of the United States. You do what's best for your country. I do what's best for my country. In both cases, they destroyed nuclear reactors. If Iraq had nuclear weapons at the time of the Iraq War, it would have been devastating. So, Israel has acted very independently. As far as Israel getting aid, remember, it's a two-way street. Israel gets military aid, which it must spend on American companies, helping them to develop both American and Israeli weapons. Let's remember some of the most important weapons used both in Israel and the Middle East and used by Ukraine were developed jointly between Israel and the United States. The relationship, the military and intelligence relationship between Israel and the United States is a two-way street. Yes, Israel is a small country, the United States is a large country, and Israel punches above its weight, to quote your guests, when it comes to providing intelligence, when it comes to providing military aid, helping to develop Iron Dome and other kinds of informations. So it's an incredibly mutually productive alliance that should continue. Now, should Israel get special treatment? Every country is treated differently. Israel gets military aid, but it must spend that aid in the United States on American companies, which it then uses to help to develop materials that are beneficial to both countries. So it's complicated and it's nuanced, and it shouldn't go back to the notion of somehow Israel is pulling all the strings, Israel is making all the decisions. The United States makes decisions that are essential to its survival. That was true of President Reagan. That was true of President Bush. That's true of President Trump. It was true of President Clinton. And no Israeli ever tells America what to do. America does tell Israel what to do. Oftentimes, Israel would like to go further, and America says it can't. Sometimes Israel disobeys, as it did with Syria and Iraq, to the benefit of the United States. But most often, it complies with American demands, as it has in Lebanon and as it did in...
What we just witnessed in that exchange isn't just a localized debate about a single geographic region. It is a fundamental disagreement on the definition of national interest. On one hand, you have the traditional establishment argument presented by Alan Dershowitz, the idea that global alliances are deeply interconnected, mutually beneficial, and that maintaining them is essential to checking hostile actors before they reach American shores. It's a framework that has defined Washington's consensus for the better part of 70 years. On the other hand, you have Joe Kent representing a rapidly growing populist base that looks at the last 2 decades of conflict and asks a much harder, more domestic question. At what cost? For this segment of the population, national sovereignty isn't just about military strength abroad, it's about economic and social stability at home. Perhaps the most fascinating element of this debate was how quickly the structural and intelligence arguments shifted into a battle over rhetoric. When the discussion turned to specific policy decisions and intelligence pipelines, the conversation immediately hit a wall regarding the phrase pulling the strings. This is the exact inflection point where logical policy analysis often gets bogged down by semantic battles. But the underlying data brought forward by the panel, particularly the questions regarding military subsidies, raised by figures like Rahm Emanuel, shows that this conversation is no longer confined to the fringes of the political spectrum. It is moving directly into the mainstream. As we look ahead, this ideological civil war is going to heavily dictate the future of political platforms. The populist base is making it clear that they expect a return on investment at home, eyeing infrastructure, economic stability, and localized challenges. The establishment, meanwhile, warns that retreating from global leadership creates a dangerous power vacuum. With future primary cycles on the horizon, this specific ideological fracture will no longer just be a talking point on late-night broadcast television. It will be the central litmus test for any candidate looking to lead their party. The old guard can no longer assume a unified front on foreign intervention, and the populist base is no longer willing to write a blank check. Now, the floor belongs to you. Where do you see the balance of this argument falling? Was the critique regarding foreign policy leverage a necessary look at institutional accountability, or did the framing of the debate distract from the core strategic realities of global alliances? Leave your thoughts and analysis in the comments below. Let's keep this discussion objective and focused on the data. If you found this deep dive valuable, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next analytical breakdown. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.